The first time I realized I was living in a totalitarian regime, I was holding a mug of lukewarm Colombian roast and watching a woman measure my lawn with a ruler. It was 7:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The sun was just cresting over the manicured horizon of Oak Creek Estates, casting long, dramatic shadows across the neighborhood. It was the kind of morning that real estate brochures promised. Dew glistening on the fescue, birds chirping in a copyright-friendly manner, and the gentle hum of a distant Prius. It should have been peaceful. It should have been the moment I patted myself on the back for surviving the housing market, securing a mortgage rate that didn't require selling a kidney, and moving into a premier community. But instead of peace, I felt a vein in my temple starting to throb. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a sharp, rhythmic ping, like a submarine sonar warning of an incoming torpedo. The torpedo was Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Homeowners Association. She was a woman who didn't just wear khakis. She embodied them. She was currently on her hands and knees in the geometric center of my front yard, her posture rigid, her visor pulled low against the morning glare. In her right hand, she held a yellow plastic ruler, the kind you buy for a third grader's math class. She jammed it into the soil, pinched a blade of grass between her thumb and forefinger, and squinted at the measurement with the intensity of a bomb disposal expert deciding which wire to cut. I watched through the living room window, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. She pulled a small, spiral-bound notepad from her back pocket. I knew that notepad. That notepad was the Black Book of Oak Creek. It contained the sins of the fathers, the mothers, and the people who forgot to bring their trash bins in by 6:00 p.m. She scribbled something down, her pen moving in sharp, aggressive strokes. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered to the empty room. I looked down at Buster. Buster was my roommate, my best friend, and the reason I was currently awake. He was 90 pounds of rescue mutt, part Labrador, part Great Dane, and part wrecking ball. He was currently sitting on the expensive hardwood floor, staring at me with soulful, amber eyes, his tail making a thump-thump-thump rhythm against the baseboard. "Do you see this, Buster?" I asked him. She brought a ruler. Buster yawned, a high-pitched squeak escaping his throat, and looked toward the window. He saw the squirrel on the oak tree before he saw Brenda, but when his eyes locked onto the movement in the yard, his posture shifted. His ears perked up. He let out a low woof that vibrated in my chest. "No," I said, pointing a finger at him. "Do not bark at the president. That's a fine." I sighed, set my coffee down on the coaster, because I respected wood, unlike some people who respected arbitrary grass heights, and walked to the front door. I unlocked it. The click of the deadbolt was loud in the morning silence. Brenda didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She just moved 2 feet to the left and stabbed the ruler into the dirt again. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp, smelling of mulch and entitlement. "Morning, Brenda," I called out. My voice was cheerful. It was the fake cheerfulness of a man trying not to scream. "Lose a contact lens?" She stood up slowly, dusting off the knees of her beige capris. She adjusted her visor, turning to face me. She wore sunglasses that were too big for her face, hiding her eyes, but I knew they were judging me. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said. She never called me Jack. It was always Mr. Miller, like I was a delinquent student in the principal's office. "No lost items, just performing the weekly compliance audit." "Audit," I repeated, stepping down onto the driveway. "Is that what we're calling it? I thought an audit involved calculators, not a ruler from an elementary school supply list. "Precision is key to maintaining property values," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. She tapped the ruler against her palm. Tap, tap, tap. "We've had reports, Mr. Miller." Reports? I looked around the empty cul-de-sac. The only witness was a plastic flamingo across the street at the Henderson place, and I knew for a fact the Hendersons were in Cabo. Reports from whom? The wind? The squirrels? "The community creates the standards," Brenda recited, ignoring my question. "The board simply enforces them. Your fescue is currently sitting at 3.5 inches. I stared at her. Okay. The maximum allowable height in Oak Creek, per Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, is 3 inches. The optimum aesthetic height is 2.5. She lowered her sunglasses to look at me over the rims. Her eyes were icy blue and devoid of joy. "It looks unkempt, Mr. Miller. It disrupts the visual flow of the neighborhood's greenscape. It suggests a lack of pride." "A lack of pride," I said, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "Brenda, I mowed it 4 days ago. It rained on Sunday. Grass grows when it rains. It's biology." "Nature is not an excuse for non-compliance," she said. I blinked. I actually blinked, trying to process the sentence. "Did you just say nature is not an excuse?" "If you cannot maintain the standard due to your schedule," she said, looking at my truck in the driveway with disdain. "We have a list of approved landscaping vendors. They come twice a week. They measure." "I have a lawnmower, Brenda. I know how to use it." "Evidently not often enough," she countered. She ripped the sheet off her notepad and walked up the driveway, extending her arm to hand it to me. "This is a courtesy notice. Have it rectified by tomorrow evening, or it becomes a $50 fine. First notice." I took the slip of paper. It was pink. It felt like a declaration of war. "Oh, and Mr. Miller," she added, turning, back toward the sidewalk. "Your trash bin." "What about it?" I asked. "It's in the garage, behind the door." "The handle," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward my garage door. "I can see the black plastic handle through the window panel of your garage door. It's visible from the street. It's inside the garage. The bylaws state that waste receptacles must be completely concealed from public view. If I can see it, it's not concealed. Put a curtain on the garage window or move the bin." She didn't wait for a response. She simply turned and marched down the sidewalk, her ruler swinging by her side like a baton, heading toward the next victim's house. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the pink slip of paper. I looked at my grass. It looked like grass. It was green. It was upright. It was fine. I went back inside and locked the door. I leaned my back against the wood, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding since moving day. Buster trotted up to me, his tail wagging. He nudged my hand with his wet nose. "I know, buddy," I whispered, scratching him behind the ears. "She's a monster." But the grass wasn't the real problem. The grass was just the appetizer. The main course was the backyard. I walked through the house to the sliding glass door that led to the patio. I looked out. My property was a decent size, about 1/3 of an acre. But in Oak Creek Estates, property lines were theoretical concepts. There were no fences. It was an open-air community. The developer had sold it as a feature: uninterrupted views of the rolling landscape. What it actually meant was that I could see into Brenda's kitchen, and she could see into mine. I watched Buster as he squeezed past me, galloping out into the yard. He did a lap, his legs flailing in that goofy, uncoordinated way large dogs have. He sniffed a tree. He chased a butterfly. And then he saw it. A rabbit. It was sitting right on the edge of the property line, near Brenda's prize-winning hydrangeas. "Buster, no," I said, tapping on the glass. Buster froze. The rabbit froze. It was a standoff. Then, the rabbit bolted. Buster launched. "Buster!" I yelled, throwing the door open. He took off like a shot, tearing across the grass. He crossed the invisible line between my yard and Brenda's in a nanosecond. He galloped through her flower bed, trampling a patch of petunias, barking his head off. "Buster, come!" I whistled, the sharp two-finger whistle I'd practiced for months. Miraculously, he stopped. He was deep in enemy territory, his paws muddy, standing right next to Brenda's birdbath. He looked back at me, tongue lolling out, looking incredibly proud of himself. "Get over here," I hissed, waving him back. He trotted back, oblivious to the international incident he had just caused. I grabbed his collar and hauled him inside, my heart hammering. If Brenda had seen that, that wasn't a warning. That was a nuisance animal. Citation. 3 of those, and the bylaws said the animal had to be removed. I looked at the dog. I looked at the neighbor's house. "We need a fence," I said out loud. "We need a big, tall, solid fence, and we need it now." Mikey was the kind of contractor you wanted in a zombie apocalypse. He was built like a vending machine, square, heavy, and impossible to tip over. He had hands that looked like baseball mitts made of leather, and he drove a Ford F-250 that sounded like it was gargling gravel. He arrived at noon, stepping out of his truck with a roll of blueprints tucked under his arm. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just a faded gray t-shirt that said, "If you can read this, you're standing in wet concrete." I met him in the driveway. "Thanks for coming on short notice, Mikey." "No problem, Jack," he rumbled. He looked around the neighborhood, his eyes narrowing as he took in the manicured lawns and the eerie silence. "Nice place. A little sterile. Tell me about it. Come round the back." We walked to the backyard. Mikey stood on the patio, chewing on a wooden toothpick, surveying the land. He looked at the property stakes I had flagged. He looked at the slope of the ground. And then, inevitably, he looked at Brenda's house. Brenda was currently on her back deck, polishing her sliding glass door with Windex. She paused, the bottle in midair, and stared at us. "That her?" Mikey asked, barely moving his lips. "That's her. The president." "She's watching us like we're stealing copper wire," Mikey noted. "She probably thinks we are. Look, Mikey, I need privacy, and I need containment. The dog is a flight risk, and the neighbor is a privacy risk. I want the Cedar Fortress package." Mikey unrolled the plans on the patio table. He weighed down the corners with a rock and his tape measure. "All right," he said, tapping the paper with a thick finger. "We're talking 6-foot board-on-board cedar, wrought board at the base so the pickets don't touch the dirt, postmaster steel posts hidden inside the wood so it never warps, capped top for trim. It's a beautiful fence, Jack. It'll outlast the house." "And it's solid?" I asked. "No gaps?" "Board on board," Mikey confirmed. "The pickets overlap. You couldn't see through it with X-ray vision. It'll cut the wind, cut the noise, and block the view. You won't see her. She won't see you." "Perfect. How much?" "Lumber is up," Mikey warned, scratching his chin. "You're looking at about 12 grand installed. Maybe 13, depending on the gate hardware." I winced. $13,000. That was my vacation fund. That was a new car. I looked over at Brenda. She was now openly staring, her Windex forgotten. She pulled out her phone, presumably to check the time or take a picture of Mikey's truck to see if it violated a commercial vehicle ordinance. "Do it," I said. "Every penny. When can you start?" "I got a gap next week," Mikey said. "But you got the permit. These places. They're sticky about permits. I have the Architectural Review Committee meeting tonight, I said, patting the folder in my hand. I've got the plat survey, the material samples, the elevation drawings. It's a standard safety fence, Mikey. They can't say no to safety. Mikey looked at me. He took the toothpick out of his mouth and pointed it at me. Jack, he said, his voice serious. I've been building fences for 20 years. I've seen grown men cry in HOA meetings. They don't care about safety. They care about control. You go in there, you be polite, but you expect a fight. They hate wood. They think it looks cheap. It's cedar, I argued. It's classic. To you and me, it's classic. To them, it's a farm fence. Just keep your cool. I'll be fine, I lied. I'm good at presentations. The Oak Creek Community Center was a building designed to look like a colonial manor, but constructed entirely out of stucco and foam. The meeting was held in the Heritage Room, which smelled of lemon floor wax and old coffee. I walked in at 6:55 p.m. I was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks. I wanted to look responsible. I wanted to look like a man who respected property values. There was a long folding table at the front of the room. Behind it sat the tribunal. There were 5 of them. On the far left was Stan, a man so old he appeared to be fossilizing in real time. He was asleep, or meditating, his chin resting on his chest. Next to him was a woman named Karen. Her nameplate literally read Karen, who was aggressively scrolling through an iPad. She had the "I'd like to speak to the manager" haircut and a scowl that could curdle milk. On the right were 2 nondescript dads, guys who looked like they were only there because their wives made them do it. They were checking their watches. And in the center, sitting on a slightly higher chair, was Brenda. She looked up as I entered. A thin, tight smile stretched across her face. It didn't reach her eyes. Agenda item number 4, she announced into a microphone that wasn't turned on, making her voice sound tinny in the empty room. Jack Miller, 404 Maple Drive. Application for structural modification. She said structural modification the way a doctor says malignant tumor. I walked to the podium. It was wobbly. I placed my thick packet of documents on it. Good evening, board members, I began, projecting my voice. Thank you for seeing me. As you can see in the packet I provided, I am requesting approval for a perimeter fence for my backyard. I paused, waiting for someone to look at the packet. No one did. Brenda was staring at me over her reading glasses. Karen was still scrolling. Stan snored softly. I have a large dog, I continued, pressing on. He is a rescue, 90 pounds, high energy. For his safety, and for the safety of the neighborhood, I need a secure containment system. I am proposing a 6-foot vertical cedar privacy fence. It will be professionally installed, stained to match the natural woodland aesthetic of the area. Cedar, Brenda said. She didn't ask it. She just said the word, letting it hang in the air like a bad smell. Yes, Western red cedar, I said. It's durable, rot-resistant, and— Mr. Miller, Brenda interrupted, raising a hand. We have reviewed your submission. I just handed it to you. We reviewed the digital submission you sent yesterday, she clarified. She clasped her hands together on the table. And I'm afraid we're going to have to deny the application. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. Denied? I asked. My voice remained steady, but my stomach dropped. On what grounds? The CC&Rs state that fences are permitted with ARC approval. With approval being the operative word, Karen chimed in, finally looking up from her iPad. Her eyes were sharp beads. We have a vision for Oak Creek, Mr. Miller. The issue, Brenda said, smoothing out a wrinkle in the tablecloth, is the material and the profile. A 6-foot solid wood fence creates a compound effect. It's aggressive. It isolates the homeowner from the community. It says, "Keep out." It's a fence, I said, gripping the sides of the podium. It is literally designed to say, "Keep out." That is the function of the object. Not here, Brenda smiled. It was a terrifying, pitying smile. In Oak Creek, we value visual flow. We value shared green space. We value the ability to wave to our neighbors from the patio. I don't want to wave to my neighbors from the patio, I said, perhaps a bit too honestly. I want to drink my coffee in my underwear without an audience. And more importantly, I want my dog to not run into the street. We would be willing to consider an alternative, Brenda offered. A 4-foot black aluminum wrought iron style fence. It's elegant, it's transparent. It disappears into the landscape. My dog, I said slowly, trying to enunciate every syllable, can jump 4 feet from a standing position. Putting up a 4-foot fence for Buster is like putting up a speed bump for an airplane. It won't work. I need 6 feet. And I need privacy. Privacy? Brenda scoffed lightly. She looked at the other board members, inviting them to share in the joke. If you have nothing to hide, Jack, you don't need a 6-foot wooden wall. Besides, wood turns gray. It warps. It looks poverty-adjacent after a few seasons. My knuckles turned white on the podium. Poverty-adjacent? I'm planning to spend $13,000 on this fence, Brenda. It's premium material. It's rejected, Brenda said, picking up a heavy rubber stamp. Motion to deny? Second, Karen snapped. All in favor? 5 hands went up. Even Stan, who looked like he was just stretching, raised a hand. Denied, Brenda said. She brought the stamp down on my application. Thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot, but we want lush, Jack, Brenda said, leaning forward. We want organic. We want nature to be the barrier. We don't want structures. We want the neighborhood to feel like a living garden. I stood there. I looked at the red, denied ink on my carefully prepared plans. I looked at Brenda's smug face. I thought about Buster waiting at home. I thought about the poverty-adjacent comment. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was a quiet, cold, mechanical click. So, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Just so I am perfectly clear for the record, you are denying the structure. You are forbidding the wood. Correct, Brenda said. But you want lush, you want organic, you want nature to be the primary visual language. Exactly, Brenda beamed, thinking she had successfully re-educated me. Landscaping is always encouraged. Hedges, bushes, vines. The greener the better. We want a botanical paradise. A botanical paradise, I repeated. And there are no height restrictions on plants? Of course not, Brenda laughed. You can't tell a tree how tall to grow, Jack. That's the beauty of nature. I nodded slowly. I picked up my rejected paperwork. Thank you, board, I said. You've been very illuminating. Glad we're on the same page, Brenda said, already looking at the next file. Try some hydrangeas, or maybe boxwoods. They're very polite plants. I'll keep that in mind, I said. I turned and walked out of the room. I walked through the lobby. I walked out into the parking lot. I got into my truck and shut the door. I sat there in the dark. Lush, organic, nature. She wanted nature. I would give her nature. I would give her the most aggressive, organic, all-natural experience of her life. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Mikey. I opened a browser and typed in the search bar. Native vines. Rapid growth. Defensive characteristics. I wasn't going to build a fence. I was going to grow a war zone. I didn't go to sleep when I got home from the HOA meeting. Sleep was for people who had fences. Sleep was for people who didn't have a 90-pound dog currently staring at me with a look that said, "I have to pee, but if I go outside, I might accidentally emigrate to the next county." I took Buster out on a leash in my own backyard, and waited while he did his business, glaring at the dark windows of Brenda's house the entire time. I imagined her in there, sleeping soundly on a pillow, stuffed with rejected permit applications. Once Buster was settled, I went into my home office, closed the blinds, and cracked open a fresh energy drink. The blue light of my computer monitor illuminated the room like a submarine control deck. I wasn't just browsing the internet. I was hunting. I had downloaded the Oak Creek Estates Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CCNRs. It was a PDF file so large it had actually caused my browser to lag. 214 pages of rules designed to strip a human being of their will to live. I started reading. Most people skim these documents. They look for the big stuff. Can I paint my house blue? Can I park a boat in the driveway? But I wasn't skimming. I was dissecting. I was looking for the negative space, the things the rules didn't say. Page 14. No permanent structures shall be erected within 5 feet of the property line. Okay, so I couldn't build a shed. Page 32. Fences must be of approved materials, wrought iron, aluminum, and maintain 80% transparency. This was the clause they used to kill my cedar dream. 80% transparency. They wanted to see through my life. I scrolled. My eyes burned. I drank more caffeine. Around 3:00 a.m., I hit page 52, section 4.2, Landscaping and Vegetation. Homeowners are encouraged to maintain healthy, native flora to enhance the natural beauty and biodiversity of the community. Living fences, hedges, shrubbery lines, organic barriers are permitted and encouraged as natural property delineators, provided they are comprised of species indigenous to the state and do not encroach upon neighboring lots. I read it again. Living fences. Encouraged. I pulled up a new tab. I searched for native flora of the Mid-Atlantic region. I cross-referenced it with fast-growing vines. The search results gave me the usual suspects. Virginia creeper, too sparse. Wisteria, invasive, non-native. Trumpet vine, too pretty. Then I saw it. Toxicodendron radicans. Poison ivy. I sat back in my chair. My first instinct was recoil. Poison ivy was the enemy. It was the thing you sprayed with Roundup. It was the thing that ruined camping trips. But then I leaned in. I clicked the link to the State University Agricultural Extension website. Status: native. Indigenous. Ecological value: high. Berries provide food for over 60 species of birds. Leaves provide habitat for beneficial insects. Growth habit: vigorous vine or shrub. Can grow up to 10 feet in a single season under optimal conditions. Legal status: protected in certain conservation areas. Not classified as a noxious weed in residential zones unless it poses an immediate public health threat to public rights of way. My backyard wasn't a public right-of-way. It was private property. Indigenous, I whispered. Ecological value. Brenda wanted lush. She wanted nature. She wanted a living garden. But a pile of ivy on the ground wouldn't stop Buster. I needed verticality. I needed a wall. I went back to the CC&Rs. I needed a structure to hold the vines, but it couldn't be a fence. If I built a fence, I was back to square one. I searched the document for trellis. Page 86, section 8.4, garden supports and arbors. Trellises, wire mesh, stakes, and cages used solely for the support of growing plants and vegetables are not classified as fences or permanent structures and do not require Architectural Review Committee approval, provided they are used for active cultivation and are substantially obscured by vegetation within 12 months of installation. I froze. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Not classified as fences. Do not require approval. Solely for the support of growing plants. If I put up a chain-link fence, they'd sue me. But if I put up heavy-gauge agricultural wire mesh and planted a vine at the base, legally, I wasn't building a fence. I was gardening. I was engaged in active cultivation. I looked at the clock, 4:15 a.m. A plan was forming. A terrible, beautiful, itchy plan. But I wasn't an idiot. I knew that technically legal was the most dangerous kind of legal. If I planted a wall of poison ivy and the neighbor's kid touched it, I could be sued into oblivion. I needed a shield. I needed Saul. Saul Goodman, not his real name, but he leaned into the comparison, was a lawyer I'd known since college. He didn't work in a glass tower. He worked out of a converted strip mall office that smelled faintly of cigar smoke and desperate plea deals. He specialized in civil disputes, which was fancy talk for professional pettiness. I met him at a diner the next day at noon. I looked like a zombie. Saul looked like he'd just won a bet. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny and eating a plate of eggs that were slightly too runny. I slammed a stack of papers onto the table, narrowly missing his ketchup. "Saul," I said, "I need you to tell me if I'm going to jail." Saul didn't flinch. He just dipped a piece of toast into a yolk. "Good afternoon to you too, Jack. Who did you kill?" "No one, yet, but I'm planning a biological attack." I sat down and laid it out. I showed him the denial from Brenda. I showed him the CC&Rs. I showed him the loopholes in Section 4.2 and Section 8.4. And finally, I showed him the Wikipedia page for toxicodendron radicans. Saul chewed slowly. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the documents. "Let me get this straight," Saul said, his voice lowering. "You want to erect a wire wall, which you will call a trellis, and cover it in poison ivy, to spite your neighbor. To secure my property," I corrected, "and to promote native biodiversity. Brenda explicitly said she wanted nature to be the barrier. I have witnesses." Saul chuckled. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Jack, this is insane. It's brilliant, but it's insane. You're talking about weaponizing botany." "Is it legal?" I asked. "That's all I care about. Is it legal?" Saul tapped his finger on the table. "Strictly speaking, yes. The CC&Rs are sloppy. Whoever wrote Section 8.4 didn't anticipate someone building a perimeter trellis. They were thinking about tomatoes, not a defensive perimeter. So contractually, you're in the clear. You don't need a permit for a plant support." "Great. But," Saul held up a finger, "tort law is a different animal. We have something called the attractive nuisance doctrine. Usually applies to swimming pools. If you have something on your land that attracts children, and they get hurt, you're liable. Now, a plant isn't usually an attractive nuisance, but if a kid reaches through that wire and gets a rash that sends him to the ER, a jury might crucify you. So I can't do it. I didn't say that. Saul smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood. I said you have liability. You mitigate liability with two things: barriers and warnings. He grabbed a napkin and a pen. He started sketching. You set the trellis back, Saul said, drawing a line. 6 inches from the property line. Do not put it on the line. If it's on the line, it's shared property. If it's 6 inches in, it's wholly yours. Brenda can't touch it. Okay, 6 inches. Second, signage. Saul circled the word. You need signs. Big ones. Ugly ones. You need to explicitly state the danger. Danger, toxic plants. Do not touch. If you warn them, and the danger is open and obvious, and they still touch it, that's assumption of risk. It's the same reason you can't sue the zoo if you jump in the tiger cage. Signs, I said. I can do signs. And finally, Saul said, leaning in, do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not trim the ivy on her side. If you trim it, you are managing it. If it grows onto her property, that's her problem. But if you cut it and leave debris, that's negligence. You plant it, you warn them, and then you let God handle the rest. Let God handle the rest, I repeated. I like that. One more thing, Saul added. Don't buy the stuff from a regular garden center. They sell wimpy ivy. If you're going to do this, you need a paper trail that proves you bought native restoration flora. Make it look scientific. I know just the place, I said. Mikey was waiting for me in the parking lot of Home Depot. He was leaning against his truck, eating a sandwich that looked like it contained an entire pig. I pulled up and rolled down the window. Get in. We're going for a ride. Mikey frowned, but climbed into my passenger seat. The suspension of my truck groaned. Where we going, Jack? I got drywall to hang at 3. We're going to the nursery. I have a new plan. The board approved the cedar? Mikey asked, looking hopeful. No, they denied it. They called it poverty adjacent. Mikey's jaw tightened. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing angrily. Poverty adjacent? I built a deck for a guy in that neighborhood last year. I know for a fact he's financing his Audi. Exactly. They want green. They want organic. So, Mikey, I need you to build me a trellis. A trellis? Mikey looked confused. Like, for roses? Like for a wall, I said. I need you to drive heavy-duty steel agricultural stakes every 4 feet. I need you to run high-tensile green wire mesh between them. 6 feet high, tight as a drum, but no wood, no rails, just wire and stakes. That ain't gonna stop a dog, Jack. A big dog will go right through chicken wire. Not chicken wire, I said. Welded wire, hog wire, the stuff they use for pigs. And it's not the wire that stops them. It's what grows on it. I hesitated. I knew Mikey. He was a good guy. He had morals, but he also had a vindictive streak a mile wide. I'm planting poison ivy, Mikey. Silence filled the cab of the truck. The only sound was the turn signal clicking. Mikey slowly turned his head to look at me. He stopped chewing. Say that again? I found a loophole. Section 8.4. Garden supports don't need permits. Poison ivy is a native plant. I'm going to grow a 6-foot wall of itchweed right in Brenda's face. I need you to build the skeleton. Mikey stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. I thought he was going to tell me to go to hell. I thought he was going to tell me he wouldn't be party to biological warfare. Then, a low rumble started in his chest. It grew louder. It turned into a laugh, a deep, belly-shaking laugh that made him wheeze. "You evil son of a bitch," Mikey gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "You're actually gonna do it." "She measured my grass with a ruler, Mikey." "Say no more," Mikey said, slapping his knee. "I'm in. I'll use the 10-gauge steel. I'll set the posts in rapid-set concrete. That wire won't move if a tank hits it. But I ain't touching the plants. You hear me? I ain't touching them." "Deal. I handled the biology. You handled the steel." The nursery was called Appalachian Native Restoration. It wasn't the kind of place where you bought petunias and cute garden gnomes. It was located 10 miles out of town, down a gravel road that winded through dense, overgrown woods. The place looked less like a business and more like a survivalist compound. There were hoop houses covered in algae, piles of compost steaming in the cool air, and a sign on the gate that said, "We do not sell invasives. Don't ask for English ivy." I parked the truck. Mikey stayed inside. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. I walked into the main office, which smelled of damp earth and fertilizer. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he had rooted into the chair. He had a gray beard that reached his chest, a flannel shirt, and fingernails that were permanently stained black with soil. His name tag said Doc. "Help you?" Doc grunted, not looking up from a seed catalog. "I'm looking for native vines," I said. "Vigorous growers, deer-resistant, drought-tolerant." Doc looked up. His eyes were sharp. "We got Virgin's Bower. We got Passion Flower. We got honeysuckle. The native kind, not the Japanese crap." "I need something stronger," I said. "Something discouraging." Doc studied me. He closed the catalog. "Discouraging for who? Deer or two-legged pests?" "Two-legged," I said. "I have a neighbor. She likes to touch things that aren't hers." Doc nodded slowly. He stood up. He was surprisingly tall. "Follow me." He led me out the back door, past the rows of polite ferns and flowers, to a locked greenhouse at the far edge of the property. The glass was whitewashed, so you couldn't see in. He unlocked the door. "Most people don't ask for this. Most people spend their whole lives trying to kill it. But in the right hands, it's a masterpiece of evolution." He opened the door. The humidity hit me first. Then the smell, a sharp, acrid green scent. Inside, the tables were filled with flats of plants. They didn't look like much, just small 3-leaved sprouts in black plastic pots. But the leaves were glossy. They looked oily. They had a reddish tint at the edges. "Toxicodendron radicans," Doc whispered reverently. "But this isn't the roadside stuff. This is a cultivar I've been working on. I call it the Gatekeeper." "What makes it special?" I asked, keeping my hands deep in my pockets. "High urushiol content," Doc said. "The oil is about 30% more potent than the wild variety. And the growth rate, with enough nitrogen, this stuff will climb a foot a week. It creates a dense, interlocking mat. Nothing gets through it. Not a dog, not a cat, and certainly not a nosy neighbor." I looked at the rows of green soldiers. They looked innocent. They looked lethal. "It's native?" I asked. 100%, Doc said. "The bees love it. The birds eat the berries in winter. It's strictly beneficial, unless you touch it." "I need enough to cover 100 linear feet," I said. Doc raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of itch, son. I have a lot of privacy to protect." "It'll cost you," Doc said. "And you sign a waiver saying you know what you're buying. I don't want your wife calling me when she gets a rash." "No, wife," I said. "Just me and the dog. And the waiver is fine." I bought 20 flats. Doc helped me load them into the bed of the truck, handling the trays with thick rubber gloves. When I got back in the cab, Mikey looked through the rear window at the plants. "That's it?" he asked. "They look like salads." "Just wait," I said, putting the truck in gear. "Give them a month. It's going to be a jungle." I drove home slowly, careful not to jostle the cargo. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. I had the legal loophole. I had the contractor. I had the biological weapon. Now all I had to do was build the trap without killing myself in the process. 2 days later. The installation. We chose a Thursday. I took the day off work. Brenda was, according to her Facebook feed, which I monitored with a fake account, at a regional HOA leadership summit in the city. She would be gone for 8 hours. We had 8 hours to change the landscape of Oak Creek forever. Mikey's crew arrived at 7 o'clock a.m. They were efficient, silent, and confused. They usually built decks and pergolas. Today, they were driving metal, stakes into the ground. "No concrete footers?" one of the guys asked. "No," I said, consulting the CCNRs. "If we pour concrete, it's a permanent structure. We drive the stakes directly into the earth. It's temporary agricultural support." They pounded the 10-foot steel T-posts into the ground, leaving 6 feet exposed. They spaced them every 4 feet, set exactly 6 inches back from the property line. Then came the wire. Heavy-gauge, green-coated, welded wire mesh. It came in massive rolls. They unrolled it and zip-tied it to the posts with stainless steel ties. It was rigid. It was strong. But it was practically invisible from a distance. By 1 o'clock p.m., the trellis was up. It ran the entire length of the backyard, separating my land from Brenda's. Then the crew left. They didn't want to be around for part 2. "Good luck, Jack," Mikey said, handing me a pair of industrial rubber gloves. "Don't scratch your nose." I was alone. I went into the garage and put on the suit. I had bought a Tyvek chemical splash suit, goggles, and a respirator. I looked like I was responding to an Ebola outbreak. I brought the flats of plants to the backyard. I dug the holes, small, shallow holes at the base of the wire, spaced every 12 inches. I took the first plant out of the pot. It was small, fragile. I tucked it into the soil. I wove its tiny tendril around the bottom wire of the mesh. "Grow," I whispered. "Grow and be mean." I repeated this 100 times. My back ached. The sweat poured down my face inside the suit. By 4 o'clock p.m., it was done. A line of small green plants stood like sentries along the wire. I watered them with a mixture of water and a high nitrogen fertilizer I'd bought from Doc. He called it rocket fuel. Then, the final touch. I walked along the line and attached the signs. I used heavy-duty zip ties to secure them to the wire at eye level. Every 10 feet. Danger. Toxic plants. Severe allergic reaction. Do not touch. Private property. The yellow and black signs stood out starkly against the green wire. They looked industrial. They looked serious. I stepped back. I stripped off the Tyvek suit and stuffed it into a trash bag. I went inside, washed my hands with Technu poison ivy cleanser, twice, just to be sure. Then I showered. I came out to the living room, grabbed a cold beer, and sat by the window. At 5:30 p.m., Brenda's Lexus turned onto the street. I watched as the garage door swallowed her car. I waited. I knew her routine. She would put down her purse, change her shoes, and come out to the back patio to inspect the neighborhood. 10 minutes passed. The sliding door on Brenda's house opened. She stepped out. She was wearing a floral blouse and holding a glass of white wine. She looked relaxed. She looked like a woman who had spent the day discussing the dangers of unauthorized bird feeders. She took a sip of wine. She looked at her hydrangeas. Then she looked at my yard. She froze. Theo's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. She squinted. She took a step forward. She saw the metal stakes. She saw the wire. She saw the yellow signs. I couldn't hear her, but I saw her mouth form the words, "What the hell?" She marched down her lawn to the property line. She stopped abruptly when she read the sign. She leaned in, careful not to cross the invisible line, trying to identify the small plants at the base of the wire. I slid my own door open and stepped out. "Evening, Brenda," I shouted, raising my beer in a toast. "How is the summit?" She whipped her head around. Her face was a mask of confusion and rising anger. "Jack, what is this?" She pointed a trembling finger at the wire. "What is this, eyesore?" "It's the landscaping you asked for," I called back, walking halfway down the yard. "I took your advice. I decided to go with a living wall. It's all native flora. 0 carbon footprint." This is a fence," she screeched. "You put up a wire fence. This is a violation of Section 3.1. "Incorrect," I shouted back, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Section 8.4, garden support structures. It's a trellis, Brenda, for active cultivation." "Cultivation of what?" She peered at the signs. "Toxic plants?" "Jack, are you insane? What did you plant?" "Biodiversity," I said. "It's a specialized native habitat. Excellent for the local bird population, but you might want to keep your hands to yourself. It's got a bit of a kick." She stared at the plants. She recognized the 3-leaf pattern. Her eyes bulged. Is that poison ivy?" "It's Toxicodendron radicans," I corrected. "Very rare, very protected." "You planted weeds!" she screamed. "You planted a hazardous weed patch on the property line." 6 inches inside the property line, I reminded her. "And it's not a weed if it's cultivated, Brenda. It's a garden. A danger garden." "I will have this down by tomorrow," she yelled, her face turning purple. "I will call the police. I will call the EPA. You are a menace!" "Read the signs, Brenda," I said, turning back to the house. "And don't touch the wire. I'd hate for you to get itchy." I walked back inside and locked the door. I watched as she stood there, fuming, screaming into her phone. I took a sip of my beer. It tasted like victory. But I knew the war had just begun. The plants were small, the wire was exposed, and Brenda was not the type to surrender. I looked at Buster, who was sleeping on the rug. "Rest up, buddy," I said. "Things are about to get weird." If you have never actively cultivated a malicious plant, you might not appreciate the specific kind of parental pride that comes with watching a biological weapon thrive. Most people garden for tomatoes or hydrangeas. They want color. They want salads. I wanted density. I wanted a wall of green rage. And thanks to Doc's special cultivar and the high-nitrogen rocket fuel fertilizer, I was pumping into the soil every Tuesday. And Thursday, I was getting exactly what I paid for. The first week was slow. The little seedlings just sat there, looking confused by the transition from the greenhouse to the clay soil of Oak Creek. I spent my evenings staring at them, willing them to climb. I checked the weather forecast obsessively. I prayed for rain. Then, around day 10, it happened. The roots took hold. The urushiol began to flow. The vines woke up and realized their sole purpose in life was to consume the wire mesh I had provided. It was terrifyingly beautiful. The leaves weren't just green. They were a deep, glossy emerald that shimmered in the sunlight. The stems were a hairy, reddish-brown, gripping the steel wire with a strength that felt sentient. They wound around the metal in tight, choking spirals, pulling themselves upward inch by inch. By the end of the first month, the trellis wasn't just a wire frame anymore. It was a fuzzy green haze. By week 6, it was a solid barrier from the ground to waist height. The neighborhood noticed. I was out washing my truck one Saturday morning when Dave, the neighbor from across the street, wandered over. Dave was a good guy, a retired accountant who spent most of his time trying to keep his lawn green enough to avoid Brenda's wrath. He stood at the end of my driveway, holding his coffee mug, staring past me at the backyard. "Jack," he said, "the landscaping. It's coming in." "It is, Dave," I said, wringing out my sponge. "Native flora. Very vigorous." "I saw the signs," Dave said, lowering his voice. Is that really poison ivy?" "It is." Dave looked at me. He looked at the hedge. A slow grin spread across his face. "She can't see into your kitchen anymore," he noted. "Nope." "And you can't see her judging your recycling sorting." "Nope," Dave chuckled. He took a sip of his coffee. "You're a legend, Jack. But you know she's going to nuke you, right? She's been walking up and down the property line every day with a clipboard. She's measuring the leaves." "Let her measure," I said. "It's a free country. Just tell your grandkids not to retrieve any frisbees from my yard." "Oh, don't worry," Dave said. "I told the whole block. We're calling it the DMZ. The kids are terrified of it. It's great." But Dave was right. Brenda wasn't idle. She was escalating. The first official strike came on a Tuesday evening. I was cooking dinner, grilling a steak on the patio, specifically because I knew the smoke would drift toward Brenda's open windows, when a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a casual patrol. The lights were off, but the car was parked aggressively, blocking my truck. I sighed, put down my tongs, and wiped my hands on a towel. Buster barked from inside the house, sensing the tension. "Stay, buddy," I muttered. I walked around the side of the house to meet the officer. It was Officer Miller again. The same guy who had responded to the noise, complaint when I built the deck, which was also permitted for the record. He looked older than he had last month. He looked like a man who was questioning his career choices. "Evening, Officer Miller," I said. "Everything okay?" He adjusted his belt and took off his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Mr. Miller, we got a call." "Let me guess," I said, jerking a thumb toward Brenda's house. "The neighbor?" "She says you're cultivating a public health hazard," Miller read from his notepad. "She says you have created a toxic fume event and are harboring noxious weeds in violation of city ordinance." "Toxic fumes?" I asked. "I'm grilling a ribeye, medium rare." Miller cracked a small smile. "She mentioned something about spores." "Officer, come with me." I led him to the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden light on the wall. It was now about 4 feet high and dense. The signs, danger, toxic plants, were clearly visible, reflecting the orange light. Miller stopped a safe distance away. He looked at the wall. He looked at the signs. He looked at the immaculate, weed-free lawn surrounding the trellis. "It's poison ivy," I stated clearly. "Toxicodendron radicans. It is a native species. I am growing it on a support structure for privacy and biodiversity." "Is that legal?" Miller asked, genuinely curious. I walked over to the patio table where I kept the binder. I had organized a waterproof binder with every relevant document, specifically for this moment. I handed it to him. "Tab 1, I said. "City Ordinance on Noxious Weeds. It lists kudzu, thistle, and giant hogweed. Poison ivy is not on the list because it is native." Miller flipped the page. "Tab 2, I continued. "HOA CCNRs, Section 8.4. Garden supports do not require permits. Section 4.2 encourages native plantings." Miller flipped the page. "Tab 3, I said. "My receipt from the nursery, proving these are cultivated plants, not wild overgrowth. And tab 4, the attractive nuisance legal defense summary, noting that the explicit signage negates liability for trespassers." Miller closed the binder. He handed it back to me. He looked over at Brenda's house. She was standing in her window, holding the curtain back, watching us. "She called 911, Miller said softly. "On the emergency line. Said she was having trouble breathing because of the emanations. Officer, unless she's licking the fence, she's fine. Urushiol is an oil. It doesn't travel through the air unless you burn it. And I'm not burning it. I'm watering it." Miller sighed. He put his hat back on. "Technically," he said, "you're in the clear. It's private property. You have signs. It's not a code violation to have a shitty garden." "It's a biodiverse garden," I corrected. "Right. Biodiverse." He turned to leave. "I'll go tell her to stop calling 911 unless she's actually dying. But Jack, be careful. People get crazy about property lines." "I'm counting on it," I said. The weeks dragged on. The ivy grew. By the 2-month mark, the wall was complete. It was 6 feet high. The vines had reached the top of the wire mesh and were beginning to fold over, creating a thick, rounded top edge. It was completely opaque. I could stand with my nose against the wire and see absolutely nothing but layered, dark green leaves. It was a fortress. The psychological effect on Brenda was profound. I knew this because I could hear her. Without the visual cue of seeing me, she had no idea when I was outside. One evening, I was sitting on a lounge chair reading a book, perfectly silent. The wall was a few feet away. I heard Brenda's back door open. I heard the clack, clack, clack of her heels on her patio pavers. "I'm telling you, Stan, it's hideous," she was saying. She must have been on the phone. "It looks like a swamp. And I know he's doing it to mock me. I can feel it." I turned a page of my book. Quietly. "And the smell," she continued. "It smells like wet weeds. It's driving down my property value. Who wants to buy a house next to a Superfund site?" I took a sip of my iced tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. Silence on the other side of the wall. "Jack?" Brenda's voice came, sharp and suspicious. "Are you there?" I didn't answer. I just sat there, smiling. "I know you're there," she yelled at the foliage. "I can hear you drinking." I remained silent. "You are a childish, petty man," she screamed at the leaves. "And you will pay for this! The board is meeting next week to discuss a new amendment specifically banning toxic cultivation." I waited until I heard her door slam shut. Then, I spoke to the air. "Good luck changing the bylaws without a quorum, Brenda." I knew the bylaws better than she did. To change a restriction, you needed a 75% vote of all homeowners, not just the board. And since Brenda had spent the last 5 years fining everyone for having the wrong shade of beige mulch, I was pretty sure getting 75% of the neighborhood to agree with her on anything was statistically impossible. But Brenda's threat worried me slightly. Not the bylaw change. That would take months. I was worried about her desperation. Desperate people do stupid things. That night, I went online and bought a camera. It was a high-end outdoor security camera with a solar panel charger and 4K resolution. I mounted it on the back corner of my house, high up under the eaves. I angled it specifically to cover the entire length of the green wall. I set the motion sensitivity to high. I set the notification sound on my phone to a jarring siren. I named the camera the Green Zone. The climax of the Cold War arrived on a humid Tuesday in late July. The ivy was at its peak. It was lush, heavy, and practically dripping with oil. The weather had been hot and sticky, the kind of weather that makes everyone irritable. I was at work. I sat in my cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet, but my mind was on the backyard. I had a feeling. It was the same feeling you get when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. At 2:14 p.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. Motion detected. The Green Zone. I grabbed the phone. Usually it was a squirrel or a bird. Sometimes it was just the wind blowing the heavy vines. I opened the app. The live feed loaded. My heart stopped, then restarted with a heavy thud. It wasn't a squirrel. It was Brenda. She was in my yard, not just looking over the line, not just standing near the line. She was fully, undeniably on my property. She was standing about 2 feet onto my grass, staring up at the wall of ivy. She was wearing a white tank top, khaki shorts, and, crucially, a pair of gardening gloves. Not the heavy rubber ones I used. No, these were the dainty floral print cotton gloves you buy at the grocery store for $5. The kind that are great for deadheading petunias, but absolutely useless against chemical warfare. In her right hand, she held a pair of long-handled loppers. "Don't do it," I whispered to the screen. "Brenda, look at the sign. It's right there." The sign. Danger. Hazardous botanicals was literally 6 inches from her face. She looked at it. She actually reached out and flicked the sign with her finger, making it swing. She sneered. I saw the sneer in 4K resolution. She raised the loppers. She didn't just snip a stray vine. She attacked. She jammed the blades of the loppers into the dense mat of vines at waist height. She crunched down. I saw the thick, hairy vines severed. The entire section of the wall shuddered. "Hey!" I yelled at my phone, startling my coworker in the next cubicle. "Sorry," I muttered, waving him off. I watched, helpless and fascinated, as Brenda went to work. She was angry. She was hacking at the vines, cutting them into 2-foot sections. But cutting wasn't enough for her. She wanted them gone. She dropped the loppers and grabbed the severed vines with her hands. She hugged a bundle of them against her chest, her bare arms pressing against the glossy broken leaves, and yanked them free from the wire mesh. Sap. Urushiol oil is potent. A pinhead amount can cause a rash on 500 people. Brenda was currently bathing in it. The cut stems were oozing the oil directly onto her gloves, which were soaking it up like sponges. She was pressing the leaves against her bare skin. She turned and threw the bundle of vines onto her own lawn. Then she went back for more. She was sweating. It was 90 degrees out. On the screen, I watched her do the one thing you must never, ever do when handling poison ivy. She raised her hand, the gloved hand, the hand covered in invisible, oily death, and wiped the sweat from her forehead. She dragged the glove across her brow, down her cheek, and over her neck. I winced. It was a physical reaction. I actually hissed through my teeth. "Oh, Brenda," I whispered. "You just painted a target on your face." She kept going. She wiped her face again. She adjusted her bra strap under her tank top. She pulled her shorts up. She spent 20 minutes destroying the center section of my wall. She cleared a 4-foot gap. She looked through the hole she had made, staring directly into my backyard, looking triumphant. She picked up her loppers. She picked up the pile of cut vines from her yard and stuffed them into a black plastic trash bag. Then she marched back into her house. The feed went still. The wind rustled the remaining leaves. I sat there in my office, my hand shaking slightly, holding the phone. I hit Save Video. I backed it up to the cloud. I emailed a copy to Saul. Then I stood up. "I have a family emergency," I told my boss. It wasn't a lie. My plants had been assaulted. I drove home. When I arrived, the damage was stark. The beautiful green wall had a jagged, ugly gash in the center. The wire mesh was exposed, looking naked and industrial. I walked up to the trellis. The smell of cut vegetation was heavy in the air, that sharp, acrid scent of broken ivy. I didn't touch anything. I went inside and put on my T-Vex suit. I went back out with yellow caution tape. I taped off the area where she had been standing on my property. I taped off the gap in the fence. Then I called the police. Not the emergency line, the non-emergency line. "I'd like to report a trespass and malicious destruction of property," I told the dispatcher. "I have video evidence, and you might want to send an ambulance to the neighbor's house, just in case." "Is someone injured, sir?" "Not yet," I said, "but give it about 12 hours. Urushiol takes time. That's the cruel genius of it. You don't feel the burn immediately. You have a window of ignorance where you think you got away with it. You go to sleep feeling fine. The oil binds to the skin cells, the immune system detects it, and then the immune system decides to burn the house down to kill the intruder. I didn't see Brenda that night. Her house was dark. But the next morning, the neighborhood group chat, which I was technically banned from, but which Dave screenshotted for me, exploded. Post from Stan, Brenda's husband. "Urgent prayers needed. We are at St. Mary's emergency room. Brenda is in severe distress. She woke up this morning with her eyes swollen shut and extreme difficulty breathing due to swelling in her neck. Doctors are saying it is a massive systemic allergic reaction. They are admitting her." I sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee. I looked out the window at the gap in the ivy. I felt a pang of guilt. It was a small pang, about the size of a crouton. I squashed it. She had trespassed. She had destroyed my property. She had ignored the signs. I picked up my phone and texted Saul. "Me. She did it. She's in the hospital." Saul. "Did you get the video?" Me. 4K. Every glorious pixel. Saul. "Do not post it. Do not share it. Save it for the cops. If they sue, that video is your shield." And Jack? "Don't say a word to anyone." A knock at the door interrupted me. I checked the peephole. It was Officer Miller. And this time, he wasn't alone. There was a man in a suit standing next to him, and a woman holding a clipboard who looked like she was from the city. I opened the door. "Mr. Miller?" the officer said. He looked exhausted. "We need to have a serious conversation." "Come in," I said. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, I'm Gregory Hines, attorney for the Homeowners Association, and this is Ms. Davids from Code Enforcement." "Jack," Officer Miller said, "Brenda is in bad shape. Her husband is claiming you set a booby trap. He's claiming chemical assault." "Chemical assault?" I repeated. "I wasn't even home." "They are saying the plants were engineered to be toxic," the lawyer said. "That you created an unnatural hazard." "Stop," I said. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my laptop. "I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just going to show you a movie." I placed the laptop on the coffee table. I opened the file. Brenda, Valles, Nature, P4. "Please watch closely," I said. The three of them leaned in. They watched Brenda walk past the "Do Not Touch" sign. They watched her hack the vines. They watched her hug the poisonous bundle. And then, the moment of truth. On the screen, Brenda wiped her sap-covered glove across her entire face. Then she rubbed her eyes. "Oh," Officer Miller said. He sounded pained. "Oh, God." The lawyer straightened up. He adjusted his tie. He looked significantly less aggressive than he had 30 seconds ago. She did that to herself," the lawyer muttered. "She's trespassing," I pointed out. "She's destroying private property, and she is ignoring a clearly posted safety warning." Ms. Davids from Code Enforcement spoke up. "Mr. Miller, while the trespass is clear, this amount of urushiol, it is a public nuisance." "It's a contained garden," I said. "It was contained until she breached the containment. Now, gentlemen, ma'am, I am happy to cooperate. But if you are here to charge me, I'd like to call my attorney, and I will be releasing this video to the local news stations. I think the headline, 'HOA President Trespasses to Attack Native Garden, Loses Fight with Plant,' will get a lot of clicks." The lawyer held up a hand. "That won't be necessary. We need to regroup." "I assume Brenda will be paying for the damage to my trellis?" I asked. The lawyer looked at me with dead eyes. "I think Brenda has paid enough, Mr. Miller." "Fair point," I said. They left. I sat back down. The house was quiet. I looked at the gap in the green wall. It was ugly, but it was also a monument. I knew this wasn't over. Brenda would recover, and when she did, she wouldn't just want the ivy gone. She would want me gone. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had given me leverage, and I knew exactly how to use it. The summons arrived via certified mail on a Thursday. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with the Oak Creek Estates logo, a stylized oak tree that looked suspiciously like a mushroom cloud. Notice of emergency hearing regarding the biological hazard at 404 Maple Drive. Date: Saturday, August 12th. Time: 10 o'clock a.m. Attendance: mandatory. I held the letter in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt like the final boss battle. I texted Saul. "Me. It's happening. Saturday." Saul. "Do you want me there?" Me. "No. If you're there, they'll clam up. I need them to be emotional. I need them to make a deal." Saul. "Godspeed. Remember, you're the reasonable one. You are the victim who just loves nature." I spent Friday preparing. I didn't mow the lawn. I didn't trim the hedges. I wanted to look like a man besieged. I printed out one document, just one. I placed it in a crisp manila folder. The Oak Creek Community Center basement was usually as quiet as a tomb. But when I walked in at 9:55 a.m. on Saturday, it sounded like a beehive that had been kicked by a bear. The room was packed, standing room only. It seemed that the poison ivy incident had become urban legend. Neighbors I had never spoken to, people who lived 3 streets over and drove Teslas, were there. They whispered as I walked down the center aisle. "That's him," I heard a woman whisper. "The plant guy. I heard he sleeps in a hazmat suit. I heard Brenda tried to burn his house down." I walked to the front. I took my seat at the small wooden table reserved for the accused. And then I looked at the board table. There she was. Brenda. If I had any lingering guilt about the incident, it evaporated the moment I saw her, mostly because the sheer spectacle of it was so absorbing. She looked like a reject from a horror movie about cursed mummies. Her left eye was swollen shut, a puffy purple slit in a sea of inflamed skin. Her arms were wrapped in gauze bandages from wrists to elbows. But the pièce de résistance was the calamine lotion. She was coated in it. Her face was a crusty, chalky mask of pink. She sat rigidly in her chair, staring straight ahead with her one good eye. Every few seconds, her shoulder would twitch, or her hand would jerk toward her neck before she forced it back down. The itch must have been maddening. It was a biblical plague, localized entirely within one woman. Next to her sat Stan, her husband. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent the last week applying lotion to an angry badger. To the right sat the HOA lawyer, Mr. Hines. He was tapping a pen on the table, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and respect. Stan cleared his throat into the microphone. Screech. "Order," Stan said. "Order in the room." The murmuring died down. "We are here," Stan began, his voice weary, "to address the situation at the Miller residence. Due to the severe health crisis caused by the unauthorized vegetation, the board has called this emergency session to vote on immediate remediation." "Unauthorized?" I spoke up, leaning into my own microphone. "Section 4.2. Native flora is encouraged." Brenda's head snapped toward me. Flakes of pink lotion drifted from her cheek. "It is a weapon," she hissed. Her voice was thick, likely due to the swelling. "You planted a biological weapon. You targeted me." "I planted a garden," I said calmly. "You targeted yourself when you trespassed on my land, ignored a federally compliant hazard sign, and physically assaulted my property with hedge clippers." "I was maintaining the neighborhood aesthetic," Brenda shrieked. She tried to slam her hand on the table, but the impact clearly hurt her skin, and she winced, letting out a sharp gasp. "Mr. Miller," the lawyer Hines interjected smoothly, "let's not get bogged down in the past. The reality is that we have a dangerous situation. The urushiol oil is potent. It poses a risk to children, to pets, to the community. The city code enforcement has flagged it as a public nuisance due to the volume." "They flagged it because Brenda called them every day for a month," I countered. "But I've spoken to the city. As long as it's contained, it's legal." "It is not contained," Brenda yelled. "It is volatile. I am living proof." "You are proof that you shouldn't touch things that have danger written on them," I said. The crowd behind me murmured. I heard a few chuckles. Brenda heard them too. Her one good eye darted around the room, realizing she didn't have the sympathy vote. "Jack," Stan said, sounding desperate. "Look at her. Please, we can't have this. We need the ivy gone." "I understand," I said. I sat back in my chair. "And I am a reasonable man. I don't want my neighbor to suffer. I am willing to remove the trellis." A collective sigh of relief went through the room. Stan slumped in his chair. "Thank you, Jack," Stan said. "We appreciate—" "However," I interrupted. The room froze. "Removal is not simple," I said. "This is a mature, high-potency crop. I cannot just go out there with a weed whacker. If I do, I will aerosolize the oil. I will create a toxic cloud that will send half this room to the ER. It requires professional abatement." "So hire a professional," Karen, the other board member, snapped. "I have a quote," I said, "from Green Zone Hazmat Landscaping. To safely remove the vines, bag them, strip the soil, and remediate the area, it will cost $15,000. $15,000? Stan choked. "That's extortion." "That's the market rate for hazardous material cleanup," I said. "And since I am being forced to remove my lawful landscaping by the board, I assume the board is offering to pay for it?" "We certainly are not," Brenda spat. "You planted it. You pay for it." "Then it stays," I said simply. "I can't afford 15 grand. I guess the ivy stays. I'll add more signs." "No!" Brenda screamed. "I can't look at it. I can't be near it. I can feel it from here." "Then we have a stalemate," I said. "Unless—" I reached for the manila folder. I opened it slowly. The sound of the paper sliding out was the only noise in the room. "Unless we make a trade," I said. I stood up and walked to the board table. I placed the document in front of Stan. "What is this?" Stan asked. "That," I said, "is a permit application. It is identical to the one you denied 3 months ago. It is for a 7-foot, board-on-board, Western red cedar privacy fence, wrought board base, Postmaster steel posts, copper caps." 7 feet? Karen asked. "The limit is 6. "The limit is whatever the board approves," I said. "I want 7, for extra safety and extra privacy." I looked at Brenda. "Here is the deal," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room. "I will pay for the removal of the ivy out of my own pocket. I will hire the hazmat crew. I will clean up the mess. I will ensure not a single drop of oil remains." I leaned in closer. "But in exchange, you sign that permit. Right now. Irrevocable approval. No aesthetic objections. No poverty-adjacent comments. You give me my wall of wood, and I will take down the wall of poison." Stan looked at the paper. He looked at the price of the cleanup he didn't want to pay. He looked at his wife, who was currently scratching her forearm with a plastic pen cap. "And if we refuse?" Stan asked weakly. "Then the ivy stays," I said. "And I release the security footage of Brenda trespassing and destroying my property to the local news. I think Channel 5 would love a story about an HOA president bullying a neighbor and getting instant karma." Mr. Hines, the lawyer, went pale. He whispered frantically in Stan's ear. I caught the words liability, viral, and settle. Stan looked at Brenda. "Honey?" Brenda was trembling. She hated me. She hated the wood fence. She hated that I had won. But she hated the itch more. The itch was a constant, screaming presence in her life. She looked at me with pure venom, but she was broken. "Sign it," she whispered. It was a croak. "What?" Stan asked. "Sign the damn paper!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I don't care. Just get that green hell away from my house." Stan grabbed a pen. He didn't even read the rest of the application. He signed the bottom line. He stamped it with the official HOA seal. Thud. He handed the paper back to me. "You have 30 days to clear the ivy," Stan said. "I'll have a crew there Monday," I said. I took the paper. I checked the signature. It was valid. I turned to face the crowd. I expected silence. Instead, I saw Dave in the 3rd row. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. I walked out of the basement. I walked out into the sunlight. I took a deep breath of fresh, non-basement air. I looked at the permit in my hand. Approved. It was the most beautiful piece of paper I had ever seen. The removal of the green wall was an event. I hired a specialized crew, just as I promised. They weren't cheap, but they were worth it. They arrived on Monday morning in a convoy of white trucks. The workers wore full-body yellow protective suits with respirators. It looked like a scene from The X-Files. The neighbors brought lawn chairs. They sat on their driveways, drinking lemonade, watching the spectacle. "It's like they're removing an alien artifact," Dave commented, standing next to me in the driveway. "Basically," I said. I watched as they carefully cut the vines, bagging them in heavy-duty biohazard bags. They scrubbed the wire mesh. They dug up the root balls. They treated the soil to neutralize the oils. It took 2 days. When they were done, the backyard looked naked. The wire trellis stood empty, a skeleton of the war we had fought. Brenda watched from her window the entire time. She never came outside. I assumed she was still recovering, molting like a lizard in her living room. On Wednesday, Mikey returned. He parked his truck in the driveway and hopped out. He looked at the empty wire trellis. "So," Mikey said, chewing on his toothpick, "the experiment is over?" "The experiment was a success," I said. "We got the permit." I handed him the stamped document. Mikey whistled. 7 feet? He asked. "I've never seen them approve 7 feet. "Hardship variance," I said. "The hardship being that my neighbor is insane." "Well," Mikey said, clapping his hands together, "let's build you a fortress." Building a fence is a loud process. There are nail guns. There are saws. There is the thud of lumber. Usually neighbors complain about the noise. Nobody complained. The entire neighborhood was so terrified that I might replant the ivy that they would have let me build a nuclear silo if it meant the plants stayed away. Mikey and his crew worked fast. They tore down the wire trellis. They pulled the metal stakes. Then they started digging the real holes. 30 inches deep. Concrete. They set the posts. They ran the rails. And then the pickets. Western red cedar. It has a specific smell, sweet, spicy, and rich. As the boards went up, the smell drifted through the yard. It smelled like money. It smelled like privacy. They built it board on board, overlapping the planks so there were 0 gaps. It was a solid wall of wood. When they reached the section facing Brenda's house, I went out to watch. The fence rose, board by board, blocking the view of her patio, blocking the view of her hydrangeas, blocking the view of her sliding glass door where she had stood and judged me for months. As the final board was nailed into place, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. I couldn't see her. I walked to the corner of the yard. I stood in the shadow of the 7-foot wall. It was cool. It was quiet. I couldn't hear her TV. I couldn't hear her phone calls. It was silent. "Beautiful," Mikey said, standing next to me, wiping sawdust off his arms. "That is a beautiful wall." "It's not a wall, Mikey," I said. "It's a peace treaty." 3 months have passed since the fence went up. My life has changed. I drink my coffee on the patio in my boxers. I throw the ball for Buster, and he bounces off the cedar planks like a squash ball, safe and contained. I haven't spoken to Brenda since the meeting. I see her occasionally when I'm getting the mail out front. She still wears the visor. She still carries the ruler. But she walks differently now. She doesn't strut. She scuttles. She has a scar on her cheek, a faint pink patch, where the rash was the worst. It's a permanent reminder. The neighborhood has changed too. People wave to me. They treat me with a strange mix of fear and respect. I am the man who weaponized nature. I am the man who beat the HOA. Last week, I was in the backyard, staining the fence to keep it looking fresh. The wood was a deep, warm amber color. I heard a noise from the other side. Sniff. Sniff. It was Brenda. She was in her garden, right up against the fence. "I can smell the stain," she muttered loudly. "It smells like chemicals." I paused. I held the brush in my hand. I could have ignored her, but I walked to the fence. I leaned close to the wood. "It's an organic oil-based stain, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Environmentally friendly, just like the ivy." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other side. Then, the sound of rapid footsteps retreating toward her house. The sliding door slammed shut. I laughed. Buster trotted over, wagging his tail. He looked at the fence, then up at me. "We did good, buddy," I said. I looked down at the base of the fence. There, poking out from the soil on my side, was a tiny three-leafed sprout. It must have survived the purge. A straggler root. I looked at it. Toxicodendron radicans. I reached down to pull it. Then I stopped. I looked at the fence. There was a tiny gap at the bottom, just enough for a vine to crawl under. Just enough for a vine to reach the other side. I stood up. I left the sprout. "Nature finds a way," I whispered. I picked up my beer and went back to the patio. The sun was setting, casting long shadows against my beautiful, solid 7-foot wall. It was a perfect evening in Oak Creek Estates.